What's up, y'all? Y'all are listening to Living Corporate's flagship podcast. If you didn't know, Living Corporate helps organizations build employee engagement and market trust through data analytics and data transformation, our e-learning platform, and brand marketing storytelling. We're so excited for you to be here today. The conversation you're about to hear is going to connect the dots between employee experience and go-to-market effectiveness. If you're not ready, get ready. Here we go. Roshan, welcome to Living Corporate. How are you doing?
I am wonderful. How are you, Zach?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. You know, it's interesting. I am excited. We talk to a lot of folks like in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space and the human capital space. And I'm not going to say we don't talk to a lot of folks who are like our part of publicly traded companies, because we do. Like we've interviewed several executives who are part of publicly traded organizations. But it's interesting as I kind of interrogate our library. I don't know if we talk to as many like CDOs and CPOs of like publicly traded tech companies right now. Like that isn't necessarily what's happening. It's a lot of, there are private institutions, or maybe they were former heads of things of that nature. I'm curious, like, as you think about your journey and the roles and space that you've held and seats that you've occupied, where and how would you say working in your capacity for a publicly traded company is different from some of your previous experiences?
So I would say first, PagerDuty is an amazing organization that is incredibly inclusive. So that comes with a lot of responsibility. And being a publicly traded entity of any kind, you have a responsibility to your shareholders, you have a responsibility to your customers, but then there's a heightened responsibility to the brand because you're publicly traded. So for me, when I think about my role and the role that I play at PagerDuty, I personally feel a sense of ownership to represent both myself as a Black woman, as a Black businesswoman, and a businesswoman who understands the imperative of DEI work to PagerDuty. That is a publicly traded organization, and that is a growth organization, within tech. So for me, I think that there's just a lot, brand integrity, personal integrity, and then how you use your voice to both uplift, empower, and educate people.
It's interesting to your point, like we get people pitching us all the time, right? Like we get several pitches a week for Living Corporate. And I do find it interesting that PagerDuty in this season and moment in time would be looking for like external brand awareness and or just like spaces to really platform their CDO, because it's like in this moment, like, I mean, the ongoing narrative, some of it, I think the framing is incorrect, but I think there's a fair sentiment to it about DEI being under attack. Like, I'm curious, like, beyond the like great billboard of PagerDuty cares about DEI, like, why do you think that PagerDuty is like giving space to these conversations for you right now as opposed to not? Because like I would say that this is not common. I'm not saying that we're the only space, but we've been here for about 6 years and we've talked to hundreds of leaders in the employee experience, workplace fairness, DEI, IND, JEDI, whatever you want to, like, however you want to frame it, space. And like we're just not getting a lot of these pitches right now. Like, I'm curious, like, why do you think that is for you?
Again, I go back to who we are. Like, we are an inclusive organization. We didn't just start after George Floyd and getting woke and saying we want to be inclusive. It's in the fiber of who we are. If you look at our CEO, she is a Filipino and white American woman. She's an influencer in her own right and a trailblazer. You look at our founders and our board, we have 65%, URP representation. So this is who we are. So we've never shied away from who we are. I think what we're also doing is looking at it from a business perspective. And how are we serving our customers? If we're a global organization, then we look at our platform with a global lens. And so when I think about DEI, I don't have a North America centric ideology of what DEI is. I have a global sense of what DEI is, what we mean to the corporate workforce. That is very different than what we mean to social society, and how we blend those two within a corporate lens, and how we leverage that in order to both influence our customers, influence our stakeholders, and really drive that business imperative. Business isn't going away. If we are in an uproar about this, element of business, that doesn't mean that that element goes away. It's just like stock. You diversify your stock. So we're diversifying our platform and using DEI as a form of that through global engagement and belonging. So we're not as focused on the acronym. We're focused on the output. We're focused on the impact. We're looking at how we are delivering change, and how that change is both influencing how people approach their own business, and then how the workforce deals with all of that change.
Rashawn, I ain't gonna hold you. You got it. Like you coming strong. Like honestly, there's so many times we had these conversations. I feel like I gotta kind of pull the guests out, gotta pull them out their show. You coming ready, swinging. I'm here for it too. I'm about to turn up with you. I love this. Okay, so so it's interesting. Like we're having this conversation, and in a season where the landscape of, and I know you said you talk about a global lens, and like I received that super fair, and it's interesting because the conversations that we're having at Living Corporate, even like around like our e-learning platform, which has like over 900 modules around like inclusive leadership and effective allyship and early career management. The ongoing questions we're getting from potential buyers is, okay, what's the global lens attached to that? Like this is American. Like how are you, like, do you have content here around supporting? We have work sites in Singapore. We have work sites in Japan. Like how does this content translate there? So I receive all of that, understood that. I still want to go back to America, though, because we're having a conversation in an election year, and you and I are having this interview around the same time that the Supreme Court has made a litany of decisions, all of which have some type of ramification or impact, not only just like to the American citizen, but of course by extension, like just the day-to-day employee. In this moment where like headlines continue to come out and decisions continue to be made that have very frightening implications, what is your perspective on what executive leaders can do to best support effective and fair employee experiences in their day-to-day, for their employees' day-to-day jobs?
Know your people. It's really simple. Know your people and your stakeholders. That extends to your customers. Know the needs of your people. So don't just label a workforce as inclusive. And I've touched with the Black and the brown, and you're checking boxes, right? What does Zach need? I know that Zach works at home. Zach works at home in the middle of a downtown area where there's lots of pollution, and there's different things that happen in his neighborhood. How do I support Zach as he is dealing with the atmosphere in his home and the atmosphere outside of his home? How do I get Zach's well-being to a place of productivity and be able to influence what's going on in our workforce, versus I'm looking at Zach as who I physically see, but I'm not in tune with what he actually needs. So that's the first thing. Know your people. Build trust. Trust will get you through the fire. Trust will take you through uncertainty. Good leaders are not made during times of prosperity and things are done well. Good leaders, effective leaders, leaders that can operationalize strategies are made during times of adversity. A leader takes you where you otherwise would not go. So you've got to make sure that you build trust so that people want to follow you. Otherwise, they're not going to go. Leadership is a privilege. People just don't say, okay, you're my quote unquote leader, or you're my boss, or you're the person in charge, and because you give me a paycheck, I'm going to go. Those days are over. We are a universe now where, like, do you see me? Do I want to work for you? Do your business values match what your core values of your organization are? And is that something I can relate to? So again, making sure that you build that level of trust. And then, like, what's the solution? Don't talk about it, be about it. Be action oriented. Give people tangible things, that tangible outcomes that they can take a hold of today versus saying, oh, okay, well, we hear you, we stand with you. What does stand with you mean? Can you explain?
Yeah,
Like, what
I don't know what that means. And
when
it's
my
crazy.
house is on fire, do you have a hoe? Are you standing with me putting the fire out? Or are you
Right.
standing with me because that just looks good to put on a piece of paper? What systematic changes are you making so that my kids cannot have to stand in the same fire that I'm standing in?
Roshan, let me tell you something. I never forget when I was I've been all over, right? So I started off, I was an HR manager at a big box retailer. Then I was an HR business partner at an oil and gas, and then in pharma. Then I got into consulting, right? So I'm a big four consultant at the time. George Ford has been murdered. And I never forget all these senior executives who weren't really supportive of my career, weren't advocating for me, weren't sponsoring, weren't, I mean, mentor. We're gonna talk about this mentoring thing, but
Yeah.
they weren't helping me before. But then all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden I get pings and messages about them standing with me, and I'm like, fam, let's pause on the existential nature of the support I need as a human being and whatever. Yo, like, you haven't even advocated for me, like, on like just my day-to-day job. So what are you talking about? You're standing with me or standing for me, or you see me, or whatever the case is. Like, I, did it take somebody being murdered for you to see me? Like, can you not just see me as an employee on my day-to-day?
But here's the issue, Zach. For some people, it does.
Mm-hmm.
For some people, the blinded privilege, they don't recognize where the privilege comes from, right? So when I think about people use that term woke, anybody that's been underrepresented, impoverished, treated unfairly, they live woke every single day. They weren't getting woke. They are woke. It is those that are not aware. So it does take us coming to the middle and being able to understand if it took, God forbid, a man dying for you to see me, that's their starting point. They didn't realize it until on national TV, they had to witness someone lose their life. And in some communities, that's an everyday occurrence. So it's that disparity of what one person's living to the reality of what one person now understands what one person is living. So it's bringing people together to say, you know what? You can't stand with me until you go on your own journey. You don't know what it's like to be to watch someone that looks like you be in peril, to watch someone who looks like you who is unhoused. So you have to be very sensitive of where people are, but you also have to be understanding of, like, they don't get it. So they're going to make some bumps, they're going to make some bruises. And what I tell people who have been marginalized for long periods of time is, you got to understand that you can't underdo. I'm a Black woman, so I'll take the Black experience. You can't underdo 400 years of injustice and expect this individual who is 40 or 50 or even 60 to right the wrongs of 400 years when they haven't been on this earth 400 years. So it also takes some willingness to say, like, what does this look like? Like, what should my journey include? And work with those people who are actually on the journey. I'm here to support, I'm here to give information, I'm here to give resources, but you, my friend, have to do the work. I
Yeah.
do the work. It doesn't
No,
work if you don't do the work.
no, I agree, and I think so much of, man, and I do want to talk about, like, I want to talk about where we are today, in this work in this space. But before that, I want to say is, like, I think my challenge continues to be, or my observation rather, and what I think is just a gap is, so often, like, we make this work really, really, really big, like the work of workplace fairness. We make it really, really, really big, and it's like, it's too specious to even wrap your arms around. So you're absolutely right. Like, I'm not going to have a 1619 book club at my job. And I love Nicole Hannah Jones. She's been a guest on the pod.
Mhm.
Like, shout out to her work. I hope we can have her again. I just think I know it's about keeping it to, like, what it is you can actually control, right?
Yes, control the controllables.
What can you control? Can you control advocating and being a present resource for your historically marginalized talent. On the other side, can you control how you show up every day and doing the best you can? Like, let's just manage those things. And I think if everyone is able to show up in those ways and just show up inclusively, like in their locuses of control,
Yeah.
then we'll have outcomes. But I think sometimes, Roshan, like when we have these discussions and we try to have these big dialogues around like unpacking your privilege and dismantling white supremacy and resisting the patriarchy, like in a corporate context, in a capitalistic context, that's just not productive to me. You know what I mean?
It's an entity. A business is an entity. An entity doesn't have feelings. So it's very hard to put so much on an entity, and you put the weight of the world on that entity. And I'm like, okay, we are one company, right? But what we can do is model ourselves for other companies to look at the successes that we found, to look at best practices that we've developed, to look at our mistakes so that you don't make the same mistakes, and to educate our workforce about what it means to truly bring yourself. Bringing yourself isn't just about you showing up as who you identify as or how you believe or what you express. It's also creating the space for others to bring themselves. And I'll give you a good example. So, it's 4th of July weekend. I had to get my nails done yesterday, and the manicurist is 20. I think China's 21 years old, white female, and she says, "I love sitting down talking with you because it's like a cultural party every time that we talk." And I recognize that I live in a particular neighborhood that is, of a particular demographic, and we'll leave it at that. And so we come together, and she really just wants to connect to like Black culture. Well, I always tell her, I don't represent all Black culture. So
Right.
if you're looking for the total Black experience, I am a Black female from Burlingame, California. I went to an all-white private school. So you got to remember, just because the color of my skin does not mean that I have every stereotypical experience. On the other hand, I'm still a Black woman. So I can tell you from
Right.
Roshan's perspective. And so her boyfriend happened to walk in, and the two of them lived together. And so he starts firing at me all these questions. And she's told him about, like, we've talked about politics, we've talked about race, we've talked about homosexuality. Like, we have deep cultural conversations. So the boyfriend is a little bit more covert than she is. So he starts drilling me about Trump and about Biden and about policy. And I said, we can't have this conversation yet. And he goes, why, Roshan? I said, because you don't understand politics. And then he said, well, what are you talking about? I said, do you know who your county supervisor is? Do you know what the role of a county supervisor is? And he's like, no. I said, so before you start going to taking the big bite of the apple and thinking about the president, I'm going to need you to bring it down a bit, because your county supervisor, that's the person that actually controls who you and I are. Our lived experience is done at the county level. So I started explaining to him the branches of government and how government works and what the power of his vote should be versus the 3 months that you look at a presidential debate and then base all your decisions on these two men. I'm like, if you stop at or started just those two men, you've left the key players out. And
Right.
that's what society wants you to believe. So I'm going to challenge you to dig a little deeper. Don't be checking boxes for the sake of I've voted for the president. Look at who you're actually voting for county supervisor. Look at who you're voting as your U.S. representative. Look at who you're voting for your Congress and for your Senate. Then come sit down and we can have a political talk. Because right now we can only talk about two people that are figureheads. They don't make all the decisions. They can veto the decisions, but they don't make all the decisions. And so he's like, oh, you're better than I thought. And I was like, no, it's not about being better. It's about being smart. That's all it
Right.
is. I don't have conversations with individuals that can't go to the deep end. If I'm already in the deep end, that means I'm going to have a shallow conversation. If you really just want to ask me what my opinion is on Biden or Trump, just ask that question.
Right.
Like, oh, I'm like, yeah, see, you can't play with adults, not educated adults, because we want to have adult-like conversations. And so I say that because I'm saying it facetiously, but I bring this whole situation up to context because not everybody is where you are. If you ask a political, economist or, somebody who's deeply embedded into politics, I'm the child. and I'm at a different level. So you've got to be able to understand who your audience is. You've got to understand what your role is. And when I think about my role as a chief diversity officer within a publicly traded organization, I want to be real humble. I want to be real humble to understand the experiences that are had by people that don't sit at the level I sit at, because I recognize even with my title, I'm still in a place of privilege. So I want to make sure that I keep myself as open, as approachable, as understanding. And when I get feedback that I don't like, because I've received feedback that I'm like, ouchie, I sit with that and I ask myself, like, what was that person's perspective? And aside from their emotions towards my actions, what were they actually trying to teach me? And let me lean into that. And let me lean into my network that might identify with that or have experienced that, so I can be a better chief diversity officer for a global publicly traded organization. And so it's just about, making sure you understand what your level is, the level that you're playing at, your audience, and how deeply and how intrinsically you want to connect with people. If you want to have a surface, this is my title, this is what I do, and I run these programs, then that's the output you're going to get. But if you want to deliver real impact that makes people follow you, then you build trust. You understand your people, you understand your culture, you understand engagement, you understand how all of those things relate to why we all come to work. We're a publicly traded organization. I want my stock to rise. I
So
want my customers to be served.
yes, and I'm sorry I cut you off. Maybe you dropping mad
No.
gems. No, listen. So you said something, and I do want to follow up on it. First of all, you talked about a lot. I want to pick on two things you said. You talked about your title, being a chief diversity officer. So I'm gonna say this is Real Talk Tuesday. We have these conversations. So I'm gonna say it, Roshan, and you can, you know what I'm saying? Obviously, you're media trained. So if you want to spin it or you want to pivot, you can, and I won't even give you no hard time. So this is the thing. Chief diversity officers, a lot of times they're chiefs in nature, they're chiefs in title, but they're like individual contributors or directors in nature. Like at what point or how do you navigate your level of power relative to your title, and have you had to struggle with that, like either at PagerDuty or anywhere else? Because oftentimes, so when I think about a chief officer, I think about a chief officer. The things I think about making them a chief officer for real, they have a budget that they control. They have a fairly healthy range of decisions that they can make. Not every decision, right? And of course, there's, especially at the senior executive level, there's decisions you can quote unquote make that might bite you later. So of course you want to be self-aware and emotionally intelligent about the decisions you make and the way you make them, but still they have some degree of actual autonomy. They have a team, and their overall the bag is significant, right? So like, to me, like, those are the things. But so often when I talk to people who are like a chief diversity officer, or even like the head of diversity, equity, inclusion, or senior VP DEI, when you like peel back the curtains, Roshan, they got like a $6,000 budget. They got, they have no team. Everything that they gotta run it up the ladder through like 6 or 7 different people. Talk to me about like how you feel about your role, and then also if you feel like what I'm saying is unfair. Because if you feel like I'm being too critical, like, I also want to hear that too.
No, so I think that what you're doing is looking at the landscape of chief diversity officers. So just because you have a title does not mean that, well, we make an assumption about what the responsibility that title brings. If you are the chief diversity officer in a company of 100, then a $6,000 budget is adequate. You're in a company of 100, just doesn't diminish your impact, but you have 100 people in your whole organization. If you are an organization that is a brand, a blue chip, and the organization is $1 trillion, if you have a budget of $6,000, you don't have a budget. You have a rounding error. And that's not even a rounding error. You just have a blimp. And so I think that when we think about equity, titles, roles, responsibilities should be equitable to the overall business model of the organization. So when I think about my title, my role is equitable to where PagerDuty is as a business. However, I will say this, coming in as PagerDuty's inaugural Chief Diversity Officer, supporting a phenomenal CEO who is just brilliant beyond. I haven't found a great adjective to depict my Jennifer Tejada, my CEO, but superhero kind of comes to mind. She is like a phenomenal individual. So that can be intimidating, right? So when I came into PagerDuty, I had to figure, like any job, you have to find your way, right? At some point in time, though, you have to figure out, am I in awe of her or am I her counterpart? Am I her support mechanism? So I got through being in awe of her and realized that if I want her to stay the phenomenal entity that she is, she doesn't have people around her to be in awe of her. That's not who she is. She has people around her to properly advise her, to be a strategic expert of where she's taken the organization. So if I wanted to truly embody being a chief diversity officer, I had to level up. And that's my responsibility. That's not her responsibility. So when she talks to her leadership team and she says, I want you to transform, Zach, I got real basic with it. I said, what does it mean to transform? I literally went to Chat GPT and said, what does it mean to transform? And when I read what it meant, I'm like, oh. So essentially, if I'm looking back on the past 12 quarters of my career, if I want the same outcome to come and it nets me right here and she's asking to move forward, I have to abandon what I've been doing, level up and understand where the business is going, and wherever there's gaps in my own offering, I have to get those gaps filled in immediately if I want to still continue to operate as the chief diversity officer with a transformative CEO. And so for me, it was about understanding how I'm going to contribute. What do I contribute to our stakeholders? What am I thinking? How am I thinking about the business as our platform operationalizes? How am I thinking about that strategy? What am I doing to both help underrepresented employees and all employees? Because again, global DEI, global equity and inclusion isn't just about a US centric experience. It is, am I thinking about culture and language? We operate in other countries outside of the US. I have a Japanese team. Am I thinking about the way that they're experiencing, PagerDuty from a Japanese perspective? If we're thinking about entering into new markets, how do we culturally influence a new market? It's different than, what we're doing in America. So am I equipping my mergers and acquisition team with the cultural norms of that landscape so that they can effectively go in and put together business strategies that will resonate with the intended audience? If I'm not doing that, then I'm not the chief diversity officer to that business group. And for me, I want to be the chief diversity officer to our entire organization. So it means making sure that I'm continuously leveling up, that I stay in line with the needs of the business, and that I just drive the imperative for understanding why this work is done. I would love to say that we all just come to work to have a sense of belonging because that's the right thing to do. That's socially the right thing to do, but that right thing to do should fuel us with the momentum and the aspiration to give what we have been hired to do back to the organization so that we can then support our customers and we can support the communities that we serve and obviously our employee stakeholders.
It's interesting to your point, like transform, level up, shift, like these words, they stick out to me because when I think about like the cyclical nature of progress, of Black and brown progress, of frankly like overall enhancement of employee experience within the workforce. Again, it's not linear, right? Like it comes. I do believe that like we had this like where like Blackness was in vogue, right? Like it was cool, it was hype, it was exciting to be Black. I was telling somebody on another interview, I was walking down the street, white folks stopped me, hand me a ice cream cone with sprinkles, and I was like, "Thank you, white person." And they were like, Black Lives Matter. And I walked, and he skipped and whistled when he walked away, Roshan. It was incredible. Well, that season is over. So I do, and like look, like we talked earlier this conversation about like these narratives around DEI being under attack and there's being like this heightened scrutiny. you picked up on woke. We're gonna have a lot of clips. Thank you for that. We're gonna clip that up. All the woke stuff you were saying, we're gonna make that work. But you're absolutely right. And and I think though that like even within that, like within the malice and the vitriol of that, there is something I'm actually excited about in that this work is going to be more operational. Like there's going to be a higher level of pressure to show and connect the relevance of this work at all, right? I mean, I just read some article. I'm not gonna promote the news the publication, but basically they were like, oh, McKinsey's analysis was wrong, and there really isn't a business case for DEI, and this is why, and it was whatever, and it's like, okay, but I still look at that and I say, okay, this is interesting because I do believe like there's going to be a lower level of willingness. There's going to be higher levels of reticence for executives to make budget for the galas and the paid awards and kind of like the ornamental window dressing some of that, the nature of some of this work that it can be. And it is going to be about people like the Roshan Kindreds of the world who are saying, hey, okay, here's where the business is. What does it look like for me to be a strategic partner? And here's how I need to like fit in. Here's the piece I need to enhance so that I can like enhance the space that I'm engaging. I think that's genuinely different. Of course, like Black and brown folks, like I do believe historically marginalized people, we engage the world of work with an internalized pressure to always be improving. So like I'm not about to act like we're not about to rewrite history, act like that's not the case. At the same time, in this particular space, I think that there's going to be ongoing pressure to actually self-improve and innovate and then show said value back to your business. It's the sitting on your hands won't be as accepted as it has been in the past.
It will absolutely not. And you hit a home run with that comment. And when I think about it, I'm going to go back to the gentleman giving you the ice cream cone and whistling away. His good deed for the day could have been, I used to think like this, I'm going to find some Black person and do a kind thing too. And if you had have been that Black person, I was like, what are you doing? What are you talking? And you met him with resistance, that would have shut him down from ever trying to do it to someone else. And so for me, as a lover of people, I'm trying to be the best example that I can be. Do I get it right every time? Absolutely not. Are there gaps in my own offering? Absolutely. But are there best practices? Do I know how to use the education that my parents sacrificed for me to have in order to help someone else's children who don't even know what secondary or post-secondary degrees are? Absolutely. I, as a human being on this here earth, and last time I checked, we were all humans, I have a responsibility to the humans that are behind me to make sure that they don't go through the same things I did. And that's the responsibility that my parents tried to give to me and tried to give to the people around them. And so I look at my job as this amazing opportunity to meet people that don't look like me, that don't have the same upbringing as me, that have different levels of education than I do, and use that for my own repertoire on how I help influence other people. And I'm hoping, my desire is that those strategies, those trends that I've witnessed within PagerDuty would be infused into the persona of who they become as individual contributors, who they become as leaders and influencers when they either rise in PagerDuty leadership or go someplace else and are impacted by the cultural experience that they've had in addition to the work experience that they've had at PagerDuty. For me, if I'm doing that, I've given back to humanity. I don't have children, so that's my way of leaving my legacy, is helping motivate, educate, and inspire people to just be good humans.
That's fire. I mean, and also I'll say like there's a level of I do believe corporate America and America just as a function, it rewards selfishness a lot of different ways, right? Like thinking of and looking to elevate yourself. I will say you invoked your own identity at the top of this conversation. It is exciting and refreshing to see someone that looks like me in a senior executive position talk about lifting as they climb. Like, like we can have a quick inside conversation outside the house. I think a lot of times in corporate American spaces, like you run into Gen X Black folks and baby boomer Black folks who have gone through unjust things that they're never going to share to get to their level. And it's almost like, okay, I'm going to just do whatever I got to do to keep my little baby seat at this table, and I'm
Mhm.
not really worried about, hey, I hope you get it if you can. I'm not going to hurt you, but I ain't going to help you neither, right?
Yeah.
And so that's exciting to I get, that as I think about that, how do you manage, right? Because I would imagine sitting where you sit, there are plenty of folks that look like you that want your time, that want your advice, that want your that want your sponsorship, that want whatever. And it's interesting. I had somebody who's an executive at Microsoft, and I didn't air the interview, and I told him I wouldn't because he looked crazy when he said it about he said he said, I'm tired of companies, just because you're black doesn't mean that you got to help all the black people. And I was like, okay, you shouldn't have said it like what are you trying to actually say? Because that sounds bad.
Yes.
So but what is your feeling of like how do you manage? Because I've talked to several black executives who do feel a pressure of almost like not wanting to let other folks down. There's women that come up to you, there's black women, brown, there's all just people in general seeking your time. But like, even though you don't have any kids, you're still a grown woman, Rashawn. You still got other things going on. How do you
True.
navigate the world of responsibilities you have, and also, you know, making time for people as you can?
So I would love to say that I have all the right answers. I don't. I love people. I love helping people. I love motivating people. And so I do oftentimes I'm involved in, a lot of things. I'm heavily involved in my sorority and in that leadership realm, but
Right.
I make sure I fill my cup up first. And as I'm filling my cup up first, I am inspired to see where it's flowing over. And when I see that somebody's got their cup extended, I don't actually care what color you are. If you need my help, I'm like, here, my cup is overflowing. But I make sure my cup is filled first. I put my mask on first. As an empath, I feed off of those around me. So I keep influential people around me. If I don't have them around me, I'm constantly seeking. I have so many LinkedIn mentors. I met Melody Hobson. I'm like, do you know that you're my mentor? Like, so it's one of those things where I think, again, the resources may not always be there. So you got to get creative. So when anybody, male, female, no matter the identity, I try to make sure my cup stays full, but that there's a little bit for them to spill over. But I tell everyone, my job as a C-suite officer is to shine the light. It actually doesn't matter where the lights shine. Your job is to be the high potential bright light that I shine it on. So if I'm shining the light on you and you're not doing what your manager needs you to do, you haven't thought about your career development, you haven't looked at the career architecture, you just say, I want a promotion or I want a raise, but it has no point of view. It doesn't build into our business model. It's not advancing our strategies. I'm like, that's not a good light for you to shine right now. I think you might want to go back to the drawing board. So I'm going to go over here and shine the light over here. And here's some best practices, and here's some tips, and here's some resources I want you to go reach out to. So when I shine the light back over here, I'm going to see progress. If I don't see
Yeah.
progress, I'm going to stop coming over here, because guess what? The light that I'm shining, it needs somebody bright to shine on, because that advances my program.
Come on.
So I'm like, listen, I'm looking for, I think about our ERGs. When I first came to PagerDuty, our ERGs were at one level. I'm like, I'm looking for our ERGs to be an ecosystem of high potential, underrepresented talent. That's
Yeah.
what I'm building for. So if you all want to do that, let's go make this happen. If you don't, I can do some programmatic things over here, and you can be happy with what you're doing. I'm not going to not do that, but PagerDuty is looking for high potential talent. I want to make sure that there are underrepresented individuals and identities within that talent. And this is the pool that I'm going to be pulling from.
Well, so first of all, I just want to say shout out to your organization, to the Deltas. I'm gonna be honest with you. Truly, I've never met a Delta that I have not genuinely liked a lot. My dad is a Kappa. My mom is an AKA. Shout out to D9. I'm me, find me, right? So I love and respect everybody. Okay. But just shout out to that. And what I've been told, a part of your organization is change. And so what you're
Yeah.
talking about is you're constantly looking to elevate and push. You know, it's interesting because I want to respect our time. We had some technical things going on. I gotta talk to the people, Roshan. They messing me up because I really wanted like another 10, but it's cool.
PagerDuty will keep their uptime up, so they
Come
might
on
want to
now.
holler at us.
They might need to holler. Okay. So anyway, we might have to do a part two. But here's what
Oh.
I want to talk about though. When I think we're going back to like this operational nature of the role changing and shifting. Some years ago, we had Michael C. Bush on the pod. For those who don't know, he's CEO of Great Place to Work.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about the role of data. This was like back in like, maybe this was like 2021. This was some time ago. And I recall back when I was a manager at PricewaterhouseCoopers, and I was just building out some data analytics solutions. And at that time, Roshan, like what we were doing was we had these M&A engagements that needed to be it was during the due diligence phase, and it was like, okay, let's do an assessment of this company versus assessment of this company to understand where the points of potential organizational dissonance are in between. So I built this analytics solution to measure that. And it was funny because at the time it was like everybody was so excited about it, and like continued on, and like now we're doing like a much more advanced version of that at Living Corporate. But even back then, Michael was like, hey, like the future of this space is going to be overwhelmingly data driven. He was like, yes, there's going to be programs. Yes, there's going to be like soft skill coaching. Like those things won't necessarily go away, but there's going to be a paradigm shift where like the descriptive, prescriptive, and predictive analytics will be like a core function. So like, I'm curious, as you look at your role and you look at the future of your working space, let's talk about the present first. And then I want to talk about like, where do you see data analytics, data visualization, and then predictive data analytics like going like at PagerDuty? And then like what is your perspective on just like the role of data within like the workplace and employee experience space overall?
So if you're not making data informed decisions, you're making guesses. So I don't live in the world of guesses, right? So I use predictive analysis to build long lasting foundational programs. I look at data to build initiatives. Initiatives gives me insights as to, is this going to be a foundational program, or is this nuanced to this specific incident, this specific time period? But I work in concert with our people analytics team. I mean, they are foundational to everything that I do. When I look at, employee feedback, our HRS data, and looking at trend analysis. And one of the things that our CEO, Jennifer Tejada, has said is, if you're looking at 6 months of data, you're not looking at data. You need 12 quarters of data to really understand predictive analysis and understand experiences. And that will show you where the trends are. And then you can look at your employee feedback. You can look at your HRS data to see where the ebbs and flows and attrition is. So if you can't look at those insights and actually draw some best practices, you really are shooting in the dark. So gone are the days. It's kind of like when the .coms just came and money was flowing and everybody had a .com or started a company, and you were getting, $100,000. Here's an SBA loan, or here's,
Right.
this capital funding. Those days, and when DEI first got popular, everybody's like, well, I'm of this identity, so I can be a CDO, or I can be the head of inclusion. Or I'm like, just because you are in community does not mean that you have the analytic skills. It doesn't mean that you have the people skills and people skills again, in order to do this work. This is a very practiced discipline. It is not about just because you identify. It is about, do you understand the financial components and how this data influence business trends? Do you understand what it means to be in an M&A situation and have to understand what the analytics are and what the people experience are, not just the liabilities and the assets, but the people component? If you can't understand data trends, then you can't properly advise your HR team. So again, it is about being a holistic business subject matter expert. You need business leaders. You need people who are thought leaders. You need people who are, analytical by nature to come into this practice and really help shift and change. And when you think about the influence of AI, you need people who can look at trends and say, okay, what are we doing for predictive analysis and how AI is being built? Well, if you don't understand code, then you're not even going to be able to help influence AI. So everybody's like, oh, let's get into AI. Do you really understand what AI is? Do you really understand how that both influences product, how that influences people, how that drives change, and then how, if the right experiences are not put into that predictive model, then you're going to get a repetition of the same thing just faster. And so for me, I look at my ability to be relevant as my ability to consistently level up. And so again, every good leader should be thinking 2 to 3 trends ahead, should be making hypotheses about where they think the next level of employee engagement is going, employee productivity is going. They should be, if they're smart right now, they're thinking about attrition that's probably going to be coming when the economy softens up. So for me, those are the things that keep me up at night. Those are the things that help me become a trusted advisor to our chief legal and people officer and to our CEO. And so those are the things that, like, I think personally for PagerDuty, what makes me an asset, and then my superpower of really being able to bring people to the middle and help people understand that it takes us both to be together in order to move forward. I can't push this forward by myself. I definitely need those subject matter experts around me to help dust it forward. So long-winded response, but that's
not long-winded. It's called a podcast, right? That's what we're supposed to be. We're here to talk, Sean. Listen, now look, we could go on all day. In fact, I had a whole extra question here about historically marginalized talent being over mentored and under sponsored, but we're gonna hold that. We're gonna hold that for part 2 because I want to have you back.
We need a part 2 on that one.
Okay,
we need a part 2 on that one, and mentality post-COVID, pre-COVID.
Because exactly, and shout out to your team who reached out to me, and I'm happy. I'm so thankful that we were able to make this happen. But here's what I want to say. The last thing I want to give you the floor, and you can, you've been dropping mics and gems all interview. I'm gonna give you space to drop as many more as you'd like. We're having this conversation on the precipice of an election. Anxieties are high. There's a lot of folks right now trying to figure out just even where they're going to work, if they're going to work again, and what that looks like. You talked about as the economy, and of course these things happen in cycles. So to say this is going to be the way it is forever is likely not true. But there's a lot of tension out there on the employer side, on the employee side, for historically marginalized talent, for talent who sits in the majority. What advice would you give to executive level leaders who are actually on the journey, who at least are saying, okay, I recognize that my workplace needs to be fair? What 3 points of advice would you give to them in this moment?
1, find a friend that doesn't look like you. Find a trusted friend that doesn't look like you. If you are someone who is looking to ally with the transgender community, make a friend that is transgender, because that'll be your trusted support, and that'll be your support system where you can be vulnerable to that person. That will help you bring your best self into the environment. Number 2, it's okay that you don't know it all. It's important that you're on the journey and you know that you're going to make mistakes. But when people see you trying, when people see you committed to trying and committed to being on the journey, most people who really want positive change will help you along the way, but they're not going to bring you along the way. They're going to help you along the way. And then number 3, don't do anything that you're not willing to support. Don't say I'm standing with you, but when it gets hot, then you're like, well, let me back away. So be informed. Make sure that what you're standing and who you're standing with, you have all the information, not just part of it, but all of it. And you understand what risk comes with that, because no matter how you stand, where you stand, there's an element of risk. Make sure that you're willing and your company is able to take that element of risk. And then the 4th thing is that trust is powerful. Trust and authenticity are powerful. If people trust in you, they will follow you. If you're authentic, they will trust you. So be authentic, allow people that opportunity to trust you through vulnerability, and it's going to work itself out. If you come into the environment and I'm like, listen, I am me, I know who I am, but I don't know if the me is enough for all of this, but I'm willing to make an effort. People they can get behind that. And as a leader, if you present yourself authentically and you trust yourself, you're authentic, I just feel like people will follow you. I've never had anybody not follow me because I was trying to be me. I will say that people stopped following me when I tried to be somebody else. So it's important for me to own who I am and to know who I am as a woman, to identify who I am, and for people not to make assumptions about who I am, because that's what gets people in trouble. So that's what I'll leave. Shout out to the Deltas too.
There you go. Roshan Kindred, Chief Diversity Officer at PagerDuty. It's been a pleasure. I genuinely look forward to us having a part 2. We will talk soon.
Awesome. Thank you, Zach. And the pleasure was all mine.
Peace.
And to all Dutonians, hey.
Living Corporate is a podcast by Living Corporate LLC. Our logo was designed by David Dawkins. Our theme music was produced by Ken Brown. Additional music production by Antoine Franklin for Musical Elevation. Post-production is handled by Jeremy Jackson. Got a topic suggestion? Email us at livingcorporatepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us online on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and living-corporate.com. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned.